Hello, Martin Farr, co-chair of Insight's public lectures. We often have public lectures which coincide with anniversaries, but we can also have them where there's an event in the future that we know will take place on a certain date, and that goes for American presidential elections, which are in November, and then the inauguration, which is the following January. So this was scheduled long in advance with the expectation that there would be the first woman president in American history, and so therefore an even more important inauguration than it would otherwise be. As events transpired, the 2016 US presidential election produced an unusual outcome in that year of unusual outcomes, Brexit and Trump being yoked by many as expressions of populist sentiment in the US and the UK. So we had the lecture scheduled. We had the lecturer, Iwan Morgan from UCL, who'd had a very large book on Ronald Reagan just published. And we were hoping for a big introduction to the programme in the beginning of the second semester. And I think partly because of the outcome of the election, we had 600 people and packed lecture theatres, a tremendous lecture from Iwan Morgan, who had the night before spoken in London at the British Library on the same subject to an audience a tenth of the size. He was absolutely astonished by the size of the Insights audience and by the reception he received and the questions he was asked. And the following morning was on BBC Radio 4's Today programme, also discussing the inauguration. So it was a great event, and we hope very much you enjoy the lecture in this year of another US presidential election.
Even had this been a fairly news-free first 11 days of a presidency, this would be quite a topical talk. As it is, we are arguably in the midst of a global event. This time yesterday, thousands of people were amassing around the monument in the centre of Newcastle, as they were across the country, protesting against a foreign leader and the invitation of this leader to this country. 1.7 million people have now signed the petition to resist the invitation offered to a head of state to visit our head of state. Earlier this afternoon, I had a meeting with Newcastle University's police officer about something unrelated, and he said, please check the EDL Facebook page. And I asked why. I don't often go to the EDL Facebook page, the English Defence League. And he said that whenever Trump is mentioned in a public occasion or public space now, the EDL appear to defend Trump and to proclaim his right against the protesters who also invariably arise. So part of the government's prevent agenda means I have to monitor the situation and make sure there are no radicals in the audience. This is a very, very great contrast from 1977. In May, when some of you may have been there, Jimmy Carter came to Newcastle and addressed thousands of people in the open air outside the Civic Centre across the road, said, "How way the lads?" in an accent as bad as mine, and thousands cheered, and Jim Callaghan, the Prime Minister, basked in his glory. There was little glory for that Prime Minister and that government, but he basked in the glory of an American president and thousands of happy people. We have something far from that today. We have, in fact, the first crisis of the May government and the awkwardness of the first world leader in her anxiousness to be the first leader to meet him, and the aftermath of that through which we will see in the next few weeks. To speak about this, in this most topical of weeks, we have the Professor of US Studies at the Institute of the Americas and the Commonwealth Fund Chair of American History, both at University College London. He has been the Director of the United States Presidency Centre, Chair of the Executive Committee of the Historians of the 20th Century United States, and also Distinguished Fellow of the Rothermere American Institute at the University of Oxford, and has been the British Association of American Studies Honorary Fellow in recognition of his contributions to the discipline. He's published widely on American politics, political economy. He's written books on Presidents Eisenhower, Nixon, and most recently, Reagan. And I'll end by saying that it was 9 days in between a presidential farewell address and a presidential inaugural address of, shall we say, contrasting tenors. And to help us make sense of this transition, may I introduce Iwan Morgan.
Well, thank you very much, Martin, for that eloquent introduction. And I'd like also to thank events manager Umbereen Rafiq for handling the logistics of my coming here so efficiently. But most of all, I'd like to thank you, the audience, for turning up in such massive numbers. I'm not used to this. Usually the first 10 rows of my lectures are vacant and all the students congregate at the back. Okay, well, my aim tonight is to cast some legacy on America's 44th president, Barack Obama, and the prospects of the 45th president, Donald Trump. The place to begin is to look at the transition event, which was the unexpected outcome of the 2016 presidential election that so few polls predicted. Now, here you have shown there two electoral college maps, the famous red and blue map. So one up there on the left is the map for 2016. Just for comparison purposes, I've got one down here on the right of 2012. Main difference between 2016 and 2012 is that in 2016, the Republican candidate, Donald Trump, carried 6 states which Barack Obama, the Democratic candidate, had carried in both the 2012 election and the 2008 election. Looking at that 2016 map, what we need to focus on is the red and the blue. You'll see lots of other colors. Now, that was because so-called faithless electors in the Electoral College cast their votes for 5 candidates not actually on the ballot. So 7 individuals actually got Electoral College votes. For those who like useless historical facts, that's the largest number since 1796, okay? Trump wins a solid Electoral College majority vote of 304 to 227. And if you get rid of the faceless electors, the result would have been 306 to 232. Pretty solid. And the 6 states that switched, most important in Electoral College terms, is the one on the, okay, is Florida right there. Then you go up to the Midwest, upper Midwest, and this is really where the election is won and lost. Of those states, you have Iowa there, you have Wisconsin there, Michigan there, and Ohio there, and then Pennsylvania. And those 5 states, they all go to Trump. They're usually safe Democratic states. Trump wins fairly easily in Iowa, hardly surprising. It's not a big city state. He wins quite easily by 8 percentage points in Ohio, which is a more impressive achievement because that is an urban industrial state. But the real surprises are Wisconsin, well, I won't use this again, I think. Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. These states are won very, very narrowly. He wins Michigan, the auto state, by 0.2% of the popular vote. He wins Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, each by 0.7% of the popular vote. Now, what this means is that had 40,000 votes in these states been strategically redirected towards Hillary Clinton, 40,000 in aggregate, we would be talking about President Clinton today, not President Trump. That's how close it actually was. Trump's Electoral College majority rests on states, the bigger states in the main, that he won very, very narrowly. This contrasts with Hillary Clinton, who won 2 states by massive majorities. She won California out there on the Pacific coast by 4.2 million votes, and directly opposite, she wins New York with its 29 electoral college votes by 1.7 million votes. These are massive victories. Doesn't matter how big the victory is, however, you can only get the 55 votes California had and the 29 votes that New York had. And Clinton actually racks up a popular vote majority of 3 million. And that is the largest popular vote majority ever won by a candidate who ended up losing in the Electoral College. This is a historically unique election. And of course, because the Donald never loses, he cannot accept the fact that he lost these states, particularly California and New York, fairly. He's already ordered an investigation of voter fraud in these states to prove that Hillary Clinton got the help of illegal immigrants and that if you take it for real Americans, Trump would have won. This inquiry, if it's ever held, will find out that Clinton won the popular vote fair and square. But that is scant consolation for the Democrats. This election has two really bad pieces of news for the Democrats. The first is that they expected to have a lock on the Electoral College. Now, the Electoral College is the body that actually elects a president, and each state's Electoral College votes are distributed according to the population of the state. And it seemed to many analysts that the Democrats had a lock on the Electoral College because their core constituencies, women, the young, African Americans and the growing Latino population would ensure that they won the states with the big cities in them, the populist big city states, and that would carry them to the magic figure of 270 electoral college votes out of the total of 538 they exist. But Trump shocked them. Trump won the electoral college vote. The popular vote majority doesn't matter in this instance. Trump wins the electoral college majority, shocking the Democrats who thought they had this almost permanent long-term lock on it. Now, this map here also hides another reality, which is even worse news, in my opinion, for the Democrats. And this is little commented on. The United States, during Barack Obama's tenure, became an increasingly Republican nation. In 2016, the Republicans not only won the presidency, they retained control of the House of Representatives, and they also retained control of the Senate, which the Democrats had hopes of carrying had Hillary Clinton won the presidency. But equally important in many regards, below the national level, the Republicans control 33 of the 50 state governorships. They also control both of the legislatures in 32 states. Now, what this means very simply is that Donald Trump takes over the presidency with the Republicans at their strongest in almost 100 years. The Republicans haven't been this strong since the 1920s. The Republicans are reaping the benefit of assiduous party building that they have undertaken since the 1980s. The Democrats, by contrast, are paying the price for complacency by comparison, because they believe that a racially and ethnically diverse America would naturally swing the national political scene towards them. Like Bill Clinton before him, Barack Obama paid little heed to party development, in marked contrast to recent Republican presidents, beginning with Ronald Reagan and more particularly with George W. Bush. Now, when Obama became president won the presidency in 2008, ended office in 2009 as the first president of black descent, there was some optimism that America was moving into a post-racial era in its history. What we mean by post-racial era, there was a hope that race would no longer be such a shaping issue of national life. Now, that hope proved to be an illusion, and for many reasons that I lack the time to go into tonight. But what I do want to say is that part of Obama's legacy, a legacy that is unintended, but it's a legacy nonetheless, is a galvanized white majority capable of perpetuating Republican power, at least in the medium term. Many analysts have suggested the Republicans now have something like a decade when this white majority that coalesced around them in the 2016 election will hold good unless there are some dramatic changes or unforeseen events. To understand why this is the case, we have to go back to the Great Recession of 2007 to 2009. America's worst recession since the Great Depression of the 1930s. The Obama administration inherited a massive economic crisis from the previous administration, the Republican administration of George W. Bush. In the first month of 2009, when Obama was taking office, the economy shed 800,000 jobs. Things looked grim, almost as grim as they had looked way back in 1933. And the Obama administration had to move quickly, and it did move quickly, to prevent this economic downturn turning into another 1930s-style Great Depression. It promoted enactment of something called the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009 to pump money into job-creating projects and to give tax benefits that would encourage consumption. This was the largest stimulus bill in American history. It cost $787 billion over 3 years. And it was soon accompanied by another highly activist anti-recession measure, the bailout that staved off the imminent bankruptcy of the American automobile industry, and obviously prevented the massive job losses that would have followed from that. In combination with the Federal Reserve's easy money policy, these measures lifted the economy out of recession in the middle of 2009. And there's Obama chipping away at the Great Recession in the cartoon there, but the chart here shows jobs lost and created. And you can see the blue lines beneath that zero mark, the job losses, job losses, job losses. But since the midpoint of 2010, jobs were created on a consistent basis. And December 2016, Obama's last full month in office, was the 75th consecutive month of jobs growth, the longest such run in American history. Unemployment in December 2016 stood at 4.7%. Now, most economists would accept 4.7% as an effective full employment level. So the question is, why didn't this benefit the Democrats? The economy is creating jobs, but the Democrats still lose. Well, the answer to that one, we have to go to the next chart. What this chart shows is that although new jobs are being created, unemployment does not come down dramatically. The reason for this is that these new jobs were needed to keep pace with new people coming into the job market. In other words, they kept pace with labour market expansion, but they did not bring unemployment down to pre-recession levels until you get to the second year of Obama's second term in 2014. So if you take that pre-recession level there, you're talking about being there, round about there, then you're going across to 2014. Early 2014, things are beginning to get better and unemployment continues to go down dramatically. But for several years, therefore, the Obama recovery looked anemic rather than robust. Now, what this did is that it allowed the Republican Party to charge that Obama's stimulus program wasn't really working and that large tax cuts of that large tax cuts rather than big spending would have worked far better and far quicker in the way that Ronald Reagan's tax cuts had supposedly done in the 1980s. There you have the cartoon there, Obama fighting off the Republican vampires who were calling for Reaganomics to be reintroduced. And the Republicans further claimed that this massive stimulus bill that had been enacted to get the economy back on its feet, plus the enactment of the Obamacare healthcare insurance entitlement in 2010, the Affordable Health Care Act, signified that the president, this is the Republicans' claim, that the president was using the recession as a smokescreen to bring socialism to America. This was a claim, utterly ridiculous, but this hyperbole reflected Republican concern that Obama's reassertion of statism, the use of government to solve problems, threatened the small government, low-tax orthodoxy that was the political legacy of Ronald Reagan. In the 1980s, Ronald Reagan had made low taxes, small government, a core element of Republican political culture, rather as Margaret Thatcher has done in Britain. And now along comes Barack Obama, using government to solve problems, spending a lot of money, and what the real Republican concern is that Obama's socioeconomic activism in time of crisis would emulate Franklin D. Roosevelt, the president in the 1930s, whose New Deal program of federal activism against the Depression had established a new liberal ascendancy in America, a liberal ascendancy that kept the Democrats in power for 30 to 40 years. So, to the Republicans, Barack Obama is a threat. And in the 2010 midterm elections, this is congressional elections and state elections only, the president wasn't on the ballot, the Republicans turned this midterm election 2 years into the Obama presidency into a referendum on Obama's job in bringing about economic recovery. And they tap into popular dissatisfaction about the slow pace of jobs recovery for people who have lost work in the Great Recession. And this is very successful. It helps the Republicans gain 63 seats in the House of Representatives to give them a new majority. The Republicans, who had been the minority in the House of Representatives, win a massive victory, and they become the majority in the lower house of Congress, the House of Representatives, and they also slash the Democratic majority in the upper house, the Senate. And from this point onwards, the 2010 midterms were a disaster for the Obama presidency, because from this point onwards, the Republicans use their majority in the House and their big numbers in the Senate to resist Obama's legislative initiatives. From this time on, it's very difficult for Obama to enact legislation on a whole host of issues because the Republicans use their power in the House of Representatives in particular to block them. And many commentators have spoken of Madison's nightmare developing in the Obama presidency. Now, James Madison was the fourth president of the United States, but he's better known to modern times as one of the key architects of the American Constitution of 1787. And James Madison was the man who devised this notion that separate institutions of government, executive, legislative, and judiciary, should share power and check and balance each other. Now, Madison always believed that in times of crisis, even if there were separate institutions sharing power, they would come together in unison and cooperate to address the nation's needs when unity was needed. A governing system that depends on compromise to work effectively, such as the American one, became trapped instead during the Obama presidency in partisan gridlock, where things just couldn't move in government because the Republicans were vetoing presidential initiatives. That's the famous snowstorm of 2013. Total gridlock, nothing's moving, sounds like business as usual. And this is American gridlock. Obama, things get even worse for Obama after the 2014 midterms when the Republicans gain control of the Senate. And one indication of that is the rate of legislative output in the last the last Congress of the Obama presidency, the 114th Congress of 2015 to 16, it only enacts 244 bills. Only 244 bills come out of it, compared to 385 in Obama's first Congress when he had a Democratic majority to work with. It's not only the lowest legislative output of any Congress of the Obama era, it's the lowest output of any Congress since World War II. That's to put it in perspective. Now, the question to ask, if things were, if unemployment wasn't getting better, why was Obama re-elected? Well, the reason Obama was re-elected in 2012 was the job situation was improving, and people thought that he deserved a chance to continue the work in the second term, but also because groups like women, African Americans, Latinos also benefited from Obama's raising of the minimum wage, benefited from Obamacare, benefited from Obama's protection of abortion rights and so on. And that Democratic coalition held good to put Barack Obama back into the White House. Now, it didn't work in 2016 in the same way, because one group that has broadly been Democratic for a long time switched sides in 2016. These were what many people have called the blue-collar working middle class. Now, working middle class to British ears sounds, it's a very strange concept. What does this mean, working middle class? Well, what it means is that these people who have had steady jobs in manufacturing for a long time, they're well paid relatively, their wage rates are protected by trade unions, not only do they get decent wages, but they also get employee benefits like healthcare and other protections, part of the things that the trade unions have won for them over the years. And in effect, although they're blue-collar workers, they are part of the great American middle class. The problem is that people in this demographic thought that the Democrats were no longer capable of delivering them the American dream. This group had suffered during the Great Recession. Many of its members had lost jobs. And many of the property they owned had declined dramatically in value. And what this meant was that the median wealth of this blue-collar middle-class, working middle-class group was lower in 2016 than it had been not only in 2008, but in the year 2000. Now, the other graph I have on the board tells a story, okay? The red line, which moves perpetually downwards, is the percentage of manufacturing workers in the total labour force. It's been going down, 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 ever since World War II, as white-collar jobs, service jobs, and other jobs have grown more significant. But keep your eye on the blue line there. The largest number of manufacturing jobs in American history came in 1979. In that year, manufacturing employment reached its historic peak of 19.6 million jobs. Came down in the 1980s, even went down in the Clinton era, but in 2000 it stood at 17.1 million. So over the last 2 decades of the 20th century, manufacturing had declined, something like 2.5 million jobs lost in 20 years. But then in the first decade and a half of the 21st century, the decline becomes precipitous. By the time George Bush left the presidency, manufacturing employment was down to 13.7 million at the end of 2007. Over the next 2 years of the Great Recession, a further 2.25 million manufacturing jobs are lost. And the nadir was in early 2010 when the number stood at something like it was around just over 11 million. For the rest of Obama's presidency, there was some small recovery. That line ends at 2014. If I had a graph showing up to 2016, it would show small recovery, so that at the end of 2016, there are 12.3 million manufacturing jobs. This is still lower than the pre-recession level. And it was a rate of improvement that was insufficient to appease the blue-collar Democrats who moved in massive numbers to support a Republican American First candidate who promised to make America great again. A promise that for many blue collars implied restoration of manufacturing to past glories. The appeal of Trump's policy as well, the making America great again, obviously extended to foreign policy. And here you have Obama treating the globe carefully with kid gloves, and Donald Trump, according to this cartoonist, treating the world like a basketball. Now, the economy was the biggest issue for voters, whether they were Democrat, pro-Democrat or pro-Republican in 2016. But it's significant that foreign policy, and especially the threat of terrorism, ranked much higher for Trump supporters than for Obama supporters, than for Clinton supporters. 79% of Trump voters thought that terrorism was a key issue that inclined them to support Trump, who promised to smash the terrorists by whatever means was necessary, but terrorism was only a concern for a major concern for some 48% of Clinton voters. Now, you'd have thought that Barack Obama had a reasonable foreign policy record. He got America out of 2 wars, in Afghanistan and Iraq. He approved the raid that killed Osama bin Laden, kept America out of new international conflicts, negotiated a nuclear deal with Iran, and signed up the United States to international climate change agreement. All of these stand as important achievements of the Obama presidency. How long they last is another matter. But even the president's supporters could not deny that threats to US international interests and national security appeared greater on his leaving office than they had done when he had entered it. The United States may have withdrawn from 2 wars on his watch, but it did not win a secure peace in either Iraq or Afghanistan. In the case of Iraq, of course, America's withdrawal from that conflict left a power vacuum that facilitated the rise of the so-called Islamic State. Obama's encouragement of the Arab Spring has also had problematic consequences in Libya and, of course, most significantly in Syria. In 2013, Obama declared that if the Assad regime used chemical weapons against Syrian rebels, it would be crossing a red line that would draw America's swift response. Well, Assad did use chemical weapons, and the Obama administration did not take very effective action in retaliation. And this sowed doubts among many allies about just how willing was the United States and President Obama to stand by its word. Obama's signature second-term policy was to be the pivot towards Asia, that Obama was going to make Asia the key area for future American foreign policy interests, but that got very little traction in his second term. And in the meantime, Obama was slow to respond to the expansionist ambitions of Vladimir Putin in the Russian borderlands and further afield in Syria. If a key index of foreign policy success is the containment of threats, Obama has arguably failed in the case of Russia, which has grown as a threat both to the United States and to NATO's security in his 8 years, and in Obama's 8 years in office. Now, to understand Obama, of course, one has to understand that he was determined not to be a unilateralist like his Republican predecessor, George W. Bush. So he was, as the cartoon shows, cautious in dealing with what he regarded as a complex, intractable world that was resistant to America's assertive leadership. He preferred analytic reasonableness to using force for the sake of American credibility, but the outcome, most analysts feel, is a more uncertain, leaderless global order. And into that void, of course, stepped Donald Trump. Now, I think it's fair to say that not since 1981 has a new president come to power so determined to repudiate his predecessor's legacy. And in many regards, Donald Trump will have to be far more transformational than even Ronald Reagan to bring about the change he promised. Sorry, I've got books to sell, so I had to get the that one in. Now, historical memory of Reagan's leadership has gone through something of a renaissance in recent years. Elderly professors, mentioning no names, who once marched against Reagan in their radical past, now write revisionist biographies of him. But far more important, Barack Obama was a big Reagan fan. This is a cover of Time from 2011, and Obama credited Reagan with achieving transformation without consequent polarization. I think that's somewhat rosy-tinted spectacles. Whoops, sorry. It's somewhat looking at the past with rose-colored spectacles, but nevertheless, it does show Barack Obama liking him. And, of course, this is a photograph from the 1980s. Trump is a big Reagan fan, okay? Donald Trump has made Ronald Reagan the subject of 85 tweets between 2011 and the end of 2016. Okay, now 85 tweets in, 6 years? Well, that's only about 14 tweets a year, isn't it? Well, it's not very big. But think about this. Trump's favorite subject is me. And here he is sharing the Twitter platform with Ronald Reagan on so many occasions. So I think that number is actually significant. Trump has plagiarized Reagan shamelessly. Okay, make America great again. The person who used that line for the first time, possibly not for the first time, but Ronald Reagan certainly used it in his acceptance address to the 1980 at the 1980 Republican National Convention when he accepted the presidential nomination. Trump's promise of peace through strength is a plagiarism of a slogan Reagan used time and again in his presidency. And all of this suggests to some pundits, could the Donald be a Ronald? Could the presidency actually of Donald Trump turn out as well as the presidency of Ronald Reagan did, at least in historical memory? Short answer to that question, I would argue, is no. Okay? Why? Well, Reagan's an internationalist who upheld America's alliance systems, not an America First nationalist. Reagan had a core philosophy. Donald Trump's never grounded his policy positions in a consistent set of principles. Reagan learned through the experience of being California governor, the nation's largest state, about the need for pragmatism and compromise in office. Trump is the only president in American history who has never previously held political office or high military command. Reagan had emotional intelligence so that he never took political setbacks personally. But Trump has a zero-sum mentality that sees himself always as winning and the other side as losing. And woe betide a situation arise when that particular equation doesn't work out. So I could go on, but I'd be very surprised if in 8 years' time we were saying this man was as successful as Ronald Reagan was. Now, here's Trump's cabinet, okay? You can't see it very well. There's a huge one there, but let me hit the highlights for you. Okay, 83% male, okay? Obama's was only 65% male. 86% white. Obama's was only 52% white. Only 55% was previous experience of government. Obama's was 87%. And here's a killer, 14% are billionaires, 0% in Obama, and 0% even in good old George Bush's cabinet. Okay, so this is if Trump is an economic populist, this is not economic populism. Okay, this is economic elitism. Now, that brings me to one of my key points this evening. Trump is often described as a populist, but this range of cabinet selections really doesn't bear that up, I think. I would argue that the Trump administration is best characterized as a conservative nationalist one, dedicated to America's interests to the exclusion of all else. I said before that Trump really has no philosophical core, which is why he is so inconsistent. But he has a group of advisors that have strongly held ideas, and these advisors see Trump as a perfect vehicle for expressing them. And these guys on the right here are, in my opinion, Trump's gurus that are the real, shall we say, Machiavellis behind the throne, who I think their influence will become more and more apparent as we go along. At the top, Chief Strategist Steve Bannon. Second, Policy Guru Stephen Miller. And the third guy, we don't know much about him as yet, and I couldn't even get a picture of him that showed his full face. Okay, that's how obscure he is. He's Deputy Chief of Staff Rick Dearborn, but he's also was the transition team executive director who got the picks for the Trump administration decided upon. So this guy is a big player in the Trump administration. And their ideas were really behind Trump's inaugural address with its very divisive American First rhetoric, and they've been influential in getting like-minded appointees into the Trump administration. And the conservative nationalists in the Trump administration, I would identify, assuming they all get their nomination is approved, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross, Environmental Protection Administration boss Scott Pruitt, Peter Navarro. Peter Navarro is head of the newly established National Trade Council, National Security Advisor Mike Flynn. Now, it doesn't matter where they are on the list. You'll get to know these guys as the weeks unfold. Now, not everybody who's been headhunted by Trump falls into that conservative nationalist character. I would say that Trump's several of Trump's national security team, the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, Defense Secretary James Mattis, and Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly are all tough hombres. I think they'd be willing to stand up to Trump when need arises, and they're not starry-eyed about Russia. What I suspect will happen, there will be a battle for the president's ear between the conservative nationalists led by these three and the conservative pragmatists whom I've identified in the national security team. But critically, and here I will try and use, this guy is the fourth of the three powerful people of the quartet, the fourth of the quartet of powerful people, Jared Kushner. He's Trump's son-in-law, and he is a big player in the administration. And I would see him siding with these three guys from some of the statements he's already made. So I'm assuming that these three guys here, plus Kushner, will be the real powers, the Svengalis in the Trump administration. Now, the success of the Trump administration hinges on the success of the economy and getting jobs back. Trump has promised that he will get the economy going by, first of all, reducing corporate taxes, that will encourage corporations that have got money overseas to bring it back without penalty to invest in the United States. So tax cuts, corporate tax cuts, will be the start of the Trump economic program. The Trump administration will then enact the largest stimulus bill, even bigger than Obama's, in order to get money into construction of roads, of bridges and other public works that will power economic growth and create more demand generally for goods in manufacturing industry. This all sounds simple, but there are a number of problems. If all this money comes back from abroad as a result of the tax cuts, there's no guarantee that it'll go into being invested in creating new manufacturing enterprises. It could just as easily go into financial investment where the returns are quicker, and investors like quick returns rather than the slower returns that come from manufacturing investment. There's no guarantee that a Republican Congress will give Trump what he wants in terms of public investment. This is a very liberal idea with a liberal pedigree dating back to the 1930s. Will a highly conservative Congress agree to that? And if it does, many in Congress will want their snouts in the pork barrel. They will want projects that create jobs for their districts, not necessarily for areas where jobs are needed. And it's very difficult. It sounds simple, but there's many a slip twixt cup and lip, I think, between with regard to Trump's economic program. There remains the possibility, too, that Trump will either renegotiate NAFTA, the North America Free Trade Agreement with Mexico and Canada, or simply walk away from it. He's already terminated all discussions about America joining the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Now, if Trump does move into a highly protectionist mode to slap tariffs on imports in order to boost American jobs, he will be playing with fire. Some 40% of Mexico's manufacturing exports to the United States rely on American parts. So American parts are imported into Mexico to make manufacturers that are sent back for sale in America. If Trump imposes retaliatory tariffs on Mexico, high tariffs on Mexico, Mexico will retaliate against American goods, and the loser will be American workers. Even more seriously, Trump has said that he will penalize the People's Republic of China with high tariffs unless they stop manipulating their currency to give them advantage in the American import market. This would be an extremely problematic decision. China is the third largest purchaser of American exports after Mexico and Canada. If Trump penalizes Chinese imports into the United States, the Chinese will retaliate by penalizing American imports into China. Nobody wins in that situation. Even worse, the Chinese are the largest purchaser of American Treasury securities. And American Treasury securities are sold to fund the American public debt. They have to have a huge sale, $2 billion worth of Treasury security sales every day. Every day. As I've been speaking, I've been going for about 40 minutes. Don't know how much that is, but a lot has been sold in the United States since I started speaking. If Trump cracks down on Chinese trade, the Chinese will simply stop buying Treasury securities, making it much more difficult for the United States to finance its public debt without raising interest rates on them, and high interest rates will feed back into the economy and retard economic growth. Now, that cartoon there is a caricature of Donald Trump's view of the world, okay? I'm not going to say too much about it other than to say that, like all caricatures, it's partly false, but contains some truths. The Trump administration really is not interested in perpetuating and expanding the rules-based international order that the United States has built and led since 1945. It thinks the world has taken America for a ride as a result of these rules, and the time has come for the world to know that America has the power to flex its muscles and make the world do what America wants it to do. Trump has even appeared to question the validity of NATO until I'm not sure if a meeting with Theresa May has changed his mind, but we'll see. But the Trump administration is out to promote an uber-realist foreign policy that is concerned above all with America's security and interests. It's only interested in the United States. This might manifest itself, for example, in scrapping the nuclear agreement with Iran and reintroducing sanctions against Iran in order to force Iran to really toe the line against the United States. Trump is also talking about removing sanctions against Putin, Russia, for the that were imposed after the annexation of Crimea. And Trump would like a closer relationship with Putin, despite what he says, not simply to have a joint alliance against Islamic terrorism, but also a joint alliance against China. Trump sees China as the ultimate threat to America's economic interests in the future, and he sees Putin as a valuable ally and counterweight to the growing power of China. Now, I could have showed you exactly the same caricature that was put out about Ronald Reagan, okay, back in 1981. And Reagan turned out to be not too bad in the end, okay? So keep in mind that this is a cartoon, and I'm sure that the Trump people know that the world is a complex and dangerous place. At least I hope they do. But there is a worry, there is a serious worry. The new administration's confidence that a foreign policy of assertive nationalism abroad can make America great again is worrying, in my opinion, because it fails to understand that other countries can be propelled by their own assertive nationalisms into confrontation with the United States. That some countries will not kowtow to the United States as easily as Trump thinks they will. The rules-based international order that the United States created in 1945 and has perpetuated ever since is, of course, and always has been, far from perfect. But its passing under Trump, if that happens, will likely make the world a more dangerous place. Now, my final slide this evening, and thank you for your patience in listening. I've talked about Trump in terms of substance, in terms of what his election means, but I think we ought to recognize something else about Trump, and I think this is the most poisonous aspect of his legacy. Trump has risen to the presidency by undermining trust in individuals and institutions who stood in his way, be they Republican rivals, his Democratic opponent Hillary Clinton, congressional leaders, and the news media, or at least the mainstream news media. He delivered the most divisive inaugural address, I would argue, in American history, with its attack on Washington elites, who in his opinion had betrayed, he comes out and he says, the Washington elites, they betrayed the ordinary people of this country. Now, back in 1981, Ronald Reagan also said, government isn't the solution to our problems, government is the problem. But Reagan talked about government in the abstract. Trump made it personal. It wasn't a philosophical attack, it was a personal attack on the competence of people in American government and the implicit promise that he is going to sort everything. We can expect more of such attacks, more stream of consciousness tweets, and more government by alternative facts. This is the one that I could have got several more in, but this is inauguration day of Trump here and Obama here, and as you can see, Trump's crowd is much... Oh, sorry, I got it the wrong way around. That's Trump's up there, and this is Obama's here. Okay, sorry, I was talking Trump speak for the moment. So, we can have a laugh about this, but it is serious. It is worrying. It's unlikely that Trump can ever behave in the way we have been accustomed to presidents behaving in the past. That is his strength as far as his followers are concerned, because it proves he hasn't become part of the hated political establishment. But he looks set to leave a poisonous legacy. Firstly, he's validated the mistrust of his supporters in government, in the people in it, and in a free press. And secondly, his lies and distortions will likely have a cumulative effect of undermining the trust of his opponents, the people who voted against him, in the institution of the presidency itself. And if he carries on as he has done in the last few days, he will undermine America's soft power that underwrites much of its influence in the world. This could have cause long-term harm if the need arises, and I suspect it's not if, when the need arises, in a post-Trump America for a different kind of Washington and a better president to deal with the nation's problems at home and abroad. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's possible there may be questions. We have two roving microphones. Could I ask you to catch my eye? I'll make sure the microphone comes to you. Please wait till it arrives and then hold it quite close and speak into it when you have your questions. So do I have a person over there, please, with a hand up? Thank you. And over this side while we're waiting, a person on this side. In the front row, please. Yeah. Thank you. Yes, please, Anna.
Hello. Is Donald Trump's use of this executive orders a new thing, or have other presidents done it?
Oh, presidents have always used executive orders, but I can't think of a president who has issued as many executive orders in his first 11 days in office. Presidents use executive orders when they want things to happen quickly and when they are not contravening the laws of Congress. The most famous executive order in American history was Abraham Lincoln's 1863 Emancipation Proclamation, okay? Now, the Republicans accused Barack Obama of excessive use of executive orders in his last 2 years in office, when he couldn't get hardly anything through Congress in terms of legislation. In actual fact, Obama's use of executive orders was very modest. I think you'd have to go back into the early days of the 20th century to see an American president who had used fewer executive orders than Obama. But Trump is seizing the moment. You know, if you saw Trump, I don't know if you watched the inauguration, but you know, as soon as the inauguration was over, as soon as before Trump sort of sat down for his celebratory meal, his minions bring him these orders for him to sign, and it's the I'm the chief executive. You know, there's only a certain amount of things you can do with executive orders, and Trump is doing them. It's operating within the grey area. You can have legal challenges, and we had a legal challenge from the acting Attorney General, who was a holdover from the Obama administration. She got sacked for her troubles, but she was only going to be there for a few more days, so you know, it was hardly surprising. But I think that more and more of this, is Congress going to accept what is a fundamental retrenchment, reduction of its institutional authority, with the president concentrating more and more power and authority in the White House? That remains to be seen. I think it remains to be seen so long as Trump is seen as an asset, a political asset to the Republicans, they will go along with him. But the first test will come in 2018, in the midterms.
And in the front row, Sam.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. That was a very interesting lecture. I really enjoyed it very much. Having been born in India, I wanted to know, you haven't mentioned India even once. You've mentioned China a number of times. And the past few years, we've been hearing about India and China when it comes to economy and other things. What do you think will Donald Trump's relationship with India be, especially in view of the fact that India has a new prime minister as well? Not as new as Donald Trump, but fairly new.
No, but possibly a prime minister who, a leader who has the same sort of impulses in some regards as Trump. Trump is far more concerned about the People's Republic of China than he is about India. You know, it's a very dangerous part of the world. India, Pakistan, nuclear weapons. The United States has always tried to moderate in that area. Trump will, I think Trump will be foolish to take his eye off that particular ball, but Trump will be hopeful of conducting new trade agreements with India. You know, that, okay, we don't have to have the Trans-Pacific Partnership, we don't even need NAFTA. There are dynamic places in the world we can trade in, and India will be a test in that regard for the potential of Trump's post-trade agreement, post-regional trade agreements world.
And up in the back there, right corner.
Okay.
Yes, since Trump was elected president, I've been consulting a few psychological textbooks. And unfortunately, Donald Trump ticks all the boxes for a working psychopath. John Maynard Keynes, I think, made the point that one of the advantages of capitalism was the psychopaths normally ended up as captains of industry, and so could do limited harm. But normally the normal political processes weeded out psychopaths because you needed people who could compromise and sort of do people work. But I said, unfortunately, Trump ticks the psychopath box, and if you look at that, then his behavior in the future becomes, in a sense, quite predictable. Thank you.
Okay, well, I guess you're asking me, do I think of Trump with a psychopath? I haven't read the same psychological texts as you, but he is a different kind of president, and you know, you can always get a laugh about Donald Trump. I actually think he's quite dangerous. And we should take him seriously. Look, however much we may think he's an idiot, and I suspect most of the people who turn up here tonight think he's an idiot, I may be wrong about that, but he's got to be taken seriously because, you know, he has a base back in the United States. He has a Republican base, he has a Tea Party base, and now he's brought into the Republican coalition, if you want, a group of voters who normally go with the Democrats, and he will want to keep them in his coalition of supporters. So you'll see a lot of Trump acting in a way that doesn't conform to the norms of the political establishment. It's a particular style he has. We may think that this style is a step backwards, particularly compared to Obama, who was very dignified, very statesman-like, but Trump's style works. And if you want an example of that, you know, all the news coverage about the immigration ban on this side of the Atlantic and for much of the world has been negative. How Trump is riding roughshod over human rights conventions, the Geneva Convention, people's basic human rights. But at least 50% of Americans, according to the polls, like what he's done. And we've got to keep in mind domestic America here. Domestic America sees or half of domestic America sees Donald Trump as a savior.
Lady in the middle here.
Well, I take Trump seriously because he has his finger on the nuclear button now. And there was someone, I think he was defense minister under Jimmy Carter and under Bill Clinton. His name is Perry, and he's very, very worried about nuclear weapons. And he said that Reagan and Gorbachev met together and actually agreed to get rid of nuclear weapons. And it was Maggie Thatcher who talked sense, so-called sense, into Reagan to not do that. Now I'm wondering what sort of sense will Theresa May, Theresa the appeaser was what was on posters last night at the demonstration, what role she will play. And my other little question is, Russia is an ally of Iran. Will Russia rein in Trump on the Iran question?
Well, firstly, let me suggest that the notion that Thatcher talked Reagan out of agreeing that the elimination of all nuclear weapons isn't accurate. Reagan and Gorbachev were on the verge of doing so, but Gorbachev insisted in the Reykjavik summit of 1986 that part of the deal should be that the United States should stop the development of the strategic defense initiative that would give it a defensive system against any nuclear attack. Gorbachev insisted on having that. Reagan said, no, I cannot sacrifice the SDI. What if we give up all our nuclear weapons and a madman comes along in some country, even a small country, 20 years from now and threatens a nuclear-free America? So that was the reason for that. With regard to the Theresa May part of the question, look, we've seen already, I think, the pluses and minuses of cozying up to Donald Trump, okay? Theresa May gets the benefit. She's something of a pariah in the capitals of the European Union. Donald Trump is. So she gets the benefit of saying, see, I'm his best friend, or close to that. But being the best friend of Donald Trump in world politics is not a good place to be because, you know, as soon as she's left, he puts his foot in it. So that Theresa May is now scrambling. There's a move afoot to get this very ill-advised, throwing a sort of poker counter into the into the interaction with Trump. Well, you know, you can come and visit the Queen. You know, you can have a state visit. That was ill-advised, I think. Look, Barack Obama didn't get a state visit until year 3. Donald Trump is going to get one probably this autumn. Okay. And I think it was foolish. It's been done. Very, very difficult to withdraw that invitation. But the notion that May somehow has a line into Donald Trump's heart is grossly mistaken.
Very far, quite right at the back there.
Yeah, given the fact that Donald Trump does put his foot in it all the time, one of the only ways of stopping him in the next 4 years might be by impeachment. What do you think the chances of that happening are?
Well, only 3 American presidents have undergone impeachment process. Andrew Johnson back after the Civil War, Richard Nixon and Bill Clinton. Johnson escaped impeachment by 1 vote in the Senate. Richard Nixon would have been impeached if he hadn't resigned, and Bill Clinton survived because not the supermajority in the Senate required for impeachment wasn't achieved. Now, all of those presidents have one thing in common. They were facing opposition Congresses, okay? Only Congress can impeach a president. I don't think the Republicans are going to impeach Trump unless there is a real smoking gun showing that he is benefiting in office from his private business interests, which he hasn't completely divested himself of. I can't see it happening myself. I know a lot of people have sort of said, you know, it's. I heard one guy talking on the BBC, and he said, "Oh, it's 60-40. I think there's only a 60% chance that Trump will see his first term out, and there'll be something that I think I can't see it personally. So long as the Republicans control Congress, I think Trump." Sorry, I think Trump is safe from impeachment.
And towards the front here, please.
Is there a potential for conflict in Israel around the Palestinian issue, the Iranian issue, because Trump appears to have a very close relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu, and also his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is a very strong supporter of Israel, and Kushner is himself Jewish. Now, I think that Netanyahu is looking to Trump to deliver a number of things. I think that we'll see a change in terms of efforts to restrain Israeli settlement in former Palestinian areas. We may see the United States agreeing to the transfer of the Israeli capital from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which would be a very provocative move. If that happens, who knows? The Middle East is such a powder keg. What you do in one area affects what might happen in another area. We can only hope that Trump is reined in on this in this regard, because the Middle East is the least likely area to respond to the kind of assertive nationalist foreign policy that he appears to embrace. I think it would create immense problems, and it's only to be hoped that the pragmatic realists in his national security team, Secretary of State Tillerson in particular, rein him back on that one.
And one more up in the corner there, gentleman with his hand up.
Hi, thank you very much for that talk. I thought it was really interesting. One thing I just wondered is if you could comment more on when you said you thought Trump would leave a poisonous legacy behind. And I wondered particularly if you think the legacy he'll leave behind in the United States will be different from the legacy he leaves behind in the rest of the world. And whether that would perhaps be a symbol of America isolating itself from world politics or world culture, just given the shock the world felt when the American population actually elected him as president.
Well, of course, we've been here before. The most unpopular American president of recent times in the rest of the world, of course, was George W. Bush. And Donald Trump is already showing signs of possibly surpassing him in that regard. There is a serious point here. America is the most militarily powerful nation on earth. Okay, I think it spends 35 times. I think it spends more than the top 34 other nations spend cumulatively on defence. Massive lead in military power. But you cannot rely solely on military power, and that is hard power. And America's influence also depends on what's called soft power. The respect for American values, the way the United States operates in the world, respecting rules, and the fact, of course, that we like American culture. It's the iconic culture for the rest of the world. But Trump could spoil a lot of that. To give you an example, I hope this doesn't happen, but after 6 years of the George Bush presidency, interest in studying American studies in Britain had declined dramatically. So, it does have an effect in all kinds of ways. And look, we've just, between these two very unpopular presidents abroad, we've had the most popular American president of modern times, Barack Obama. Okay, now Barack Obama conducted himself respectfully to allies. He had a very dignified demeanor, and of course, most of the rest of the world wanted him to succeed because he was the first president of black descent. So Obama's presidency meant hope not only for the United States, but hope for the rest of the world. And there's something of we're now in a reaction against that. And I suspect Trump will always be compared unfavorably to Obama in many, but not all parts of the world. One other thing I would say about this comparison of Trump and Obama, which I didn't bring in my talk, and possibly it has some link to the question asked about impeachment. Whatever else you say about Barack Obama, and he had his shortcomings and he had his strengths, but one undoubted strength: this was a scandal-free presidency and a scandal-free administration. You've got to go back to Jimmy Carter for a comparably scandal-free presidency. And, we've just become accustomed to things going wrong, but Barack Obama did leave high standards, and I think Trump will... I don't expect Trump to fulfill them, but I think that that is something that he could learn if he does learn from his predecessor.
Also, one more in the far corner there.
Thank you very much. Do you think anyone or anybody has the remotest chance of re-educating Trump about the environment and climate change?
Look, the short answer to that is no. And Trump has surrounded himself with climate change deniers. Okay, the new EPA director was I can't remember exactly what, I think it was Energy Secretary of State for the state of Oklahoma, an oil-rich state. He sued the EPA 24 times. And Barack Obama has now brought him in to run the agency. He is going to be a non-regulating regulator. So, I think there's no chance. There's climate change deniers dotted all over the place. The Secretary of Commerce, Wilbur Ross, is one. Steve Bannon, the guru that I mentioned, he says it's all a cooked-up idea by America's opponents to get us to reduce economic growth. So the answer to your question is no. Don't look for any dramatic change in the next 4 years.
And now the other side at the back, please.
Professor, this might be related to your your answer to the Israeli issue earlier on.
Yeah.
But you mentioned in your lecture that there is a lack of a philosophical, a coherent philosophical basis to President Trump's kind of ideas.
Yeah.
What about the religious right, the Christian right, the fundamentalist right in America today? Hasn't he got a lot of support from them? And my question really is, do you foresee a greater religious and racial polarization in the years ahead?
Well, you're absolutely right that Trump did gain a lot of support from the religious right. I can only speculate that the religious right loves a sinner, the Lord loves a sinner, and Trump is certainly a sinner. So a sinner who I don't think Trump has admitted sufficient error yet. But on a more serious note, I think you're right. There is a sense now that a lot of the political correctness that the right associates with the shift towards a more racially equal society, a society where women have greater rights. I think that is going to change, that there's going to be a lot of assault on that over the next 4 years. And that the polarization will continue. When you look at the United States at the moment, the Democrats are in an awful condition, all right? They're slightly better than the Labour Party in Britain, but that is not saying much, okay? If you were to ask me, nobody's asked me this, well, who's going to be the Democratic candidate in 2020? I haven't got a clue. Neither do the Democrats. Bernie's too old, okay? Bernie will be 78. You're not even guaranteed that he's going to be alive in 4 years' time. The trouble is that, there is no... They leapt a generation with Obama, then they went back to the old one with Hillary. They really need somebody who can mobilize that Obama constituency of women, the young, and racial minorities again. Hillary Clinton lost in large part because even forgetting the blue collars, she just couldn't get them out in sufficiently large numbers to vote. She just couldn't enthuse them. Some of them voted for the Green candidate, some of them voted for the Liberty Party candidate. 7% of the vote in 2016 went to minor parties. Now, if Barack Obama had been running, I think he would have harvested more of his normal constituency, of his 2008-2012 constituency, and he would have beaten Trump handily. But Barack Obama couldn't run, and the question is, who will run in 2020? Some people have said Bernie Sanders, too old. In my opinion, sorry to be ageist, but I'm allowed to be ageist because I'm old myself. Some people say Elizabeth Warren doesn't have the national profile. Where is this person going to come from? Is there another Barack Obama who comes from nowhere to win in to win the nomination in 2020? But, you're operating in an environment in the United States at the moment where the Republican Party is very strong, and the groups who have long supported the Republican Party, the ones that you mentioned, the religious right, you could add to them the conservative base, the Tea Party base. The momentum is very much with the right at the moment.
Thank you. And lady in the red jumper here.
Thank you.
Yes, sorry, Chris. Yeah.
That was very interesting. You've just talked a bit about the Republicans, and that was what my question was about. When you speak of them as a group, in fact, they're made up of a number of groups, and what I would be interested in your view on is how much is this factionalism or the divisiveness amongst the Republican Party itself going to have an impact on how effective Trump can be?
Well, on some issues, the Republicans are united with Trump. I think, for example, I suggested in the talk that by and large they would be supportive of tax cuts. Okay, I've lost the lady. Who was I talking? Sorry, couldn't see. I think they would be supportive of tax cuts, but look, the Republicans had supposedly said, well, small government is good, public spending ought to be reduced. That doesn't fit with the stimulus program. So I think there could be a problem there. But the people around Trump, Steve Bannon and his group, they are not real Republicans in the sense that they want to get the Republican Party as a tank off the bridge, and they want to create a new style politics and policy that will appeal to people who will keep the party going on this conservative nationalist route for years to come. They're interested in legacy building. Now, the question is, of course, the Republican Party, if you compare the Republican Party and the George Bush, and they allowed George Bush a huge amount of leeway between 2002 and 2006, because George Bush was considered an electoral asset. Trump has just won the presidency against all the odds. So they are looking to him to keep them in power. And the last thing they will want, at least in the run-up to the 2018 midterm elections, is intra-party factionalism. So Trump has got time to play with. But, he is as well the most unpopular incoming president in the history of polling. Okay, Barack Obama was 75% approval rating in the months before he entered office. Much good that did him. Trump is around 48%.
You mentioned during the talk about how Obama managed to unify white voters and blue-collar voters against him and kind of middle-class working blue voters. I was wondering whether you could comment on the role of Obama's attempts at gun control in that mobilization against him.
These are all important points, okay? Look, the two most anti-Obama states were West Virginia and Kentucky, okay? Now, you'd have said, these are two of the poorest states in the Union. You'd have said, if these people aren't voting Democrats, have they lost their mind? Well, the reason they went voting Democrat is partly to do with guns, okay? It's partly to do with God. They think that Obama is not sufficiently godly. Partly to do with guns, but it's also to do with coal, okay? Obama's hopes for gun control and climate change initiatives lost him these two places. The other place that Obama's legacy hurt the Democrats badly was in Pennsylvania, okay? Now, Pennsylvania is a very unusual state. It's got Philadelphia in the east, and it's got Pittsburgh in the west. And in between is hillbilly country. Okay, that's an exaggeration, but bear with me, okay? Yeah. And it's in that hillbilly country where Obama's legacy hurt Clinton. They felt that, they didn't like her stand on guns. They didn't like Obama's stand on guns. They thought Clinton and Obama were coal industry. And, there was a feeling that they stood for a cultural legacy that these groups did not want to be a part of. So, that's part of the problem, is that, the rational economic point of view, you support the party that's going to be, that's going to look after the less privileged in society, but it doesn't work out like that. There are too many complex issues in the United States.